tell us a little bit about this work as the executive director of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, because this actually speaks to some of what we're talking about right now as well, preserving our culture, preserving our legacy. Talk about how you got into this.
Yeah, so I can give you a quick recap of my kind of journey into historic preservation. So I'm from a little place called Paducah, Kentucky. I ended up
Wait,
going to
hold on. Did you say Paducah?
I said Paducah, yes.
I thought that was like a mythical place. Paducah is like a pejorative for, middle America or, like bum F, Kentucky or some place like that, Paducah
Yep,
is a real
Paducah,
place.
Kentucky. It's a real place. It's literally far western Kentucky. Population about 35,000. So as you can imagine, as I look back on my journey to preservation, my first memory of the intersection between race, place, and identity happened when I was in the fourth grade. So as this professional development exercise, my mom would have me and my twin, when we were registering for school, to go up and to introduce ourselves and to sign the paperwork. And I went up to the desk and I said, "Hello, my name is Brent Legs." And she said, "What's your home address?" And I said, 741 McGuire Avenue. She said, "What apartment number?" And I said, 741. And she said, "No, what apartment number?" And I'm looking at my mom. My mom is starting to get agitated. Come to find out, she thought that I lived in the low-income housing that was at the other end of the street. My parents in 1972 built their own red rent-style brick house that they were very proud of. And when I asked my mom why she was upset, she said it was because of the assumption that you lived in low-income housing, regardless of everything that we have done to be able to uplift our family and this community. And that sticks with me, that connection between race, place, and identity. I would eventually go to the University of Kentucky. I got a master's degree in business, and I was searching for my professional identity. Corporate America didn't seem right for me. So I started looking at PhD programs. I thought I'd get a PhD in history. I then thought, I'm going to get a PhD in philosophy, and realized I needed to speak a fluent second language. So I thought, that's not going to be a good fit. And then I thought I found it, which was a furniture making program in the School of Architecture at UK. And when I went inside to learn more, this old white guy, long beard, literally down here, we had this random 15-minute unintentional conversation. He said I'd be the first African American to go into the graduate preservation program. I can make, in his words, a shitload of money using tax credits because the loft conversion was hot at the time. And that was enough for me. I mean, I literally was searching for my identity. And 2 months later, I was studying architectural history, learning about Gothic and iconic columns, and I questioned that decision. It didn't connect to me personally. But thankfully, they had me to conduct a statewide inventory of historic Rosenwald schools in my home state of Kentucky. And when I learned that Booker T. Washington in 1912, that he would partner with Julius Rosenwald, and that together they would help to fund the construction of over 5,000 schools in 15 southern states. 158 of those schools were constructed in Kentucky. And during this 1.5-year-long research project, I learned that my mom and dad attended Rosenwald schools. And I remember standing at a school building, literally being held up by a tree, and touching and interacting with his history, and realizing that the bold idea inside of Booker T. Washington's mind was manifested in physical form known as a Rosenwald School, and that his vision for uplifting the Black community was real and ongoing and had directly impacted my life through my parents attending Rosenwald School. So this gap between space and time was eliminated, and it made me start thinking, what is my social responsibility, like Booker T. Washington, to confront a crisis in Black education? What can I do to continue to uplift and empower our community?
What's
So
dope?
every
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What's really dope about that? I'm sorry, Drew, because as he's talking, I'm thinking Booker T. Washington was born into bondage. Didn't know who his daddy was. Was probably one of the masters or the master's relatives. Right? Walked to school, slept in the gutter. Was made to clean the school because he showed up dirty because he walked so many days and had to sleep in the gutter because he had no money. Made to clean, and he did that willingly to get an education. And I think about the 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 knocks that Booker T. Washington gets today, and the call that people call him a sellout because we're not intellectually nimble enough to say two things can be true. W.B. Du Bois was right, and so was Booker T. Washington. And if you don't understand the lens through which they were both trying and converged in many ways, much the way Malcolm and Martin did, in ideals about our upliftment, then you are intellectually sophomoric and immature, and we need to do better. And so I'm glad that you said that, a living, breathing manifestation of this man's vision. That was, man. I'm sorry, Drew. I just had to get that out because
I love that too. I love that observation, Karen, because I do feel like that that one of the things that's starting to happen is that we're starting to bastardize our icons ourselves. It used to be everybody else was bastardizing our icons and taking pot shots and easy shots at our historical icons. And I love that you said that. Brent, Andrew McCaskill. I am a Sirius XM contributor and super excited to talk to you because we've been talking about preservation in many different forms, whether it's like preservation and restoration of the accuracy of our history, all of those things. We've been talking about that a lot. And I know, some of the work that you've done with, sort of the famous domiciles and homes and things like that of black historical figures. I'm curious, does any of that translate to some of we were talking about how so many black historical figures have like unmarked graves and things like that. How are those correlated at all in terms of the homes or the land where people actually lived on, and these sort of this tradition almost of or unmarked graves for so many black historical figures?
Yeah, that's a good question. So through the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, which is a program that I run, we help to preserve cultural landscape. So you can think about the free black settlements across Texas, or a cultural landscape that's a cemetery like God's Little Acre in Newport, Rhode Island. Literally one of these rare cultural spaces where the African names are on the tombstones. You literally can go and recite their names. Or historic buildings that come in all different types of forms, whether it's a historic theater on the south side of Chicago called the Forum, or whether it's Nina Simone's childhood home in a rural town called Tryon, North Carolina. In essence, our work is to preserve the collective memories of Black America through a physical form or through the land, to be able to ensure that the stories of the icons of the Black experience, that their memories are forever told, but also telling the story of the everyday Black experience. So for us, it's about balance. It's about the icons and the big historical moments, but it's also bringing recognition to the overlooked everyday experience.
Why is this so important? We're talking with Brent Legs, of course. He is the executive director of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. Why is this so important to America? And if you're listening, because we have quite a few folk who don't have a whole lot of melanin who listen to the show, and they're part of this family too, because they want to know, they want to learn. They're advocates and they're allies. Why is this important for them and their children?
So we created the Action Fund in 2017, and this happened after the events in Charlottesville. And we all remember the tragedy where culture, heritage, and public spaces collided in the most negative and violent ways. I'm sure we all remember the image of white men in khaki pants, polo shirts, tiki torches, rallying around a Thomas Jefferson sculpture on the campus of UVA. Many Americans don't realize that the University of Virginia's campus is a World Heritage Site to honor a former president. They don't highlight that UVA's campus, in my opinion, is a landscape of blackness built by black hands. And so you have white men that are rallying around a piece of public art and sculpture on a historic landscape, wanting to create a new form of Jim Crow. They did that because they have been miseducated about the origins of America. They have been misinformed about the full contributions of Black America to this nation. Preservation is education. When visitors, whether white or black and in between, walk into the home of Pauli Murray in North Carolina, they learn about a black woman that became a lawyer, first African-American Episcopal saint, co-founder of the National Organization of Colored Women, and who Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in honor of Pauli Murray's civil rights research, named her first Supreme Court briefing in honor of Pauli Murray. I mean, can you imagine all of the stories and places that if we preserved, we would be able to begin to reconstruct America's identity. And we would empower not just white America, but we would help to remind Black America of its fullest potential.
So let me ask you this. What do you think is the most sort of untold or overlooked aspect of the Black experience in this country?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this, in many ways, centers my service. So the Black experience, as we all know, has been rooted in almost in a stereotypical identity related to a painful past, slavery, or our contribution is known through the lens of civil rights. Because in essence, we have shifted the national consciousness of this nation, and that is never to be diminished, shouldn't be diminished. But the story of African-American achievement, Black excellence, the story of HBCUs, the story of Black entrepreneurship, knowing that we live in a capitalistic society and yet we don't celebrate the legacies of Annie Malone and Madam C.J. Walker and all
Robert Church.
Great,
yeah.
Yes, A.G. Gaston. I mean, we could go on and on about the contributions that they have made. And when people realize that Madam Walker in 1918 integrated the most expensive zip code in the United States at the time in Irvington, New York. She built a 20,000 square foot estate on the same street as industrialist Jay Gould's Lyndhurst and 3 miles from the Rockefeller estate called Keikin. It was designed by the first Black licensed architect in the state of New York, a co-founder of the fraternity Alpha Phi Alpha Incorporated. His name is Vertner Tandy. This historic and elegant residence stands to embody the optimism and perseverance of American entrepreneurship. Madam C.J. Walker's story matters, and there are so many other stories like that.
Lawaro, which was purchased by a black man that had a seat on the stock exchange, and then it was recently sold to the man that now owns Essence. 866-801-8255. I don't know how I feel about that, but we're going to go to the phones. Brent Leggs is here. Of course, Drew McCaskill is here as well. Let's head over to Florida. Now, is it Orlando, Florida, or is Orlando your name?
Orlando is my name.
And you just happen to be in Florida?
Happen to be in Florida, but I'm from Kentucky, and I went to University of Kentucky, so when I heard Mr. Legg talking, I just want to call and say hi to a fellow Wildcat. But
hey, man.
I was with Dr. Gerald Smith. He's basically a historian there. He went to UK with me, and now he's there as a professor. And he's doing a lot of work also with Black history and basically developing and archiving some of the oral traditions of Blacks in Kentucky. So I thought that was something that was kind of motivated me because I basically went to the Army. He stayed in college, got his doctorate. But since then, I've got my doctorate, kind of following him. But it's a lot of motivation there. There's a lot of stuff that deals with UK's history, too, that's sort of racist. But just things that we all had to overcome at the time.
Well, thanks for sharing. Welcome to your brother here, Orlando. Thanks for calling. And Brent, as he's speaking, I was thinking, how can we help you do what you do? Is there something that people listening can contribute to make your job easier, or to give you more, insight? Or
Yeah. So one, it takes money to preserve history, and the Action Fund is a $25 million campaign, the largest ever undertaken on behalf of African American historic places by a national preservation organization. We're at $23.5 million towards our $25 million goal. And the bigger part of this mission is to help preserve 150 Black history sites. So they can go to savingplaces.org, make a donation. We will steward those funds appropriately. Second, reach out and identify and find an African American historic site and cultural organization in your community. See what support they need. Most of these historic sites are all volunteer driven, and they're grassroots driven. So to be able to diversify their board with professional capacity, to be able to have the resources to restore the historic buildings, develop engaging public programming, so that they stand in their fullest glory and contribute to the economic and cultural health of our historic neighborhoods. So I would say identify a place, see how you can support them, and then last, understand that we are nothing without our memories, and especially not just our individual but our collective memories. We don't know who we are. So building on what you said earlier about curiosity, be curious to walk inside of spaces that's imbued with Black history. Be curious to learn why your neighborhood looks the way that it does. Be curious about American history and identify the gaps so that we can begin to preserve the places to tell that story.
Listen, Brent, I know one of the things that when you said that, reach out and find these places in our communities, how? Give us one step further. How do we do that? And that's the first question. And I want you to, before you jet, to talk too about all of these companies that are throwing money in theory at the Black community. What's the process for getting some of those dollars diverted towards preserving our history as preserved by people who look like us?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm excited to see corporate America begin to not just talk about equity, but to make equitable investments in Black culture and Black spaces. And I hope that they understand that preservation is one solution to begin to revitalize Black neighborhoods and in essence, really honor Black culture. And that's been a gap for us, is having corporate support. And I hope we're able to grow that. I would go ahead. I was just going to say that. So when I started work for the National Trust, it was in 2005, and I lived in a neighborhood literally by accident. It was called Beacon Hill. When I moved there, I had no idea that Beacon Hill was where the abolitionist movement was, in essence, birthed. It was a free Black settlement on the north side of Beacon Hill. You see these historic buildings, but on Joy Street stands the oldest standing Black church in America, called the African Meeting House, constructed in 1806 by a free Black community. Right adjacent to it is the Abel Smith School, constructed in 1835. Inside the African Meeting House is where William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and the legends spoke from that pew. It literally was the first time whites and blacks publicly advocated and expressed their disdain against this institution known as slavery. I literally walked my neighborhood and discovered this because the universe brought that information to me. I would just challenge the visitors to be curious enough to ask the question. If there's a historic marker, read it. And don't think that that's all the education that you needed. Walk inside that historic space and try to find out, what is the black history here? Even if you tour a white space like James Madison's Montpelier, known as the father of the Constitution, we know that because of his privilege and the access and economy that was supported by the enslaved workers on his plantation allowed him the luxury to become the father of the Constitution. There's a black story embedded in that cultural landscape, and they are beginning to tell that story. So I just go back to this idea that discovery is part of the curiosity, and I just challenge people to continue to be curious.
Well, we're going to continue to have this conversation with you. You'll be back, of course. His name is Brent Legs, 2 G's and an S. You can follow him on Twitter at Brent Legs. Also get his book, Preserving African American Historic Places, and go to savingplaces.org. And if you are so inclined to keep this going and have the extra funds, donate. We're the reparations we're looking for. We're going to be the ones to take care of our legacy. Savingplaces.org. Brent, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.